Hi everyone, delonewolf here and welcome back to EVE Talk, your weekly look at the market in EVE Online. Last week was decently interesting. We did have a patch, of course, with some balance changes, but I must also say that at the moment all of this does feel like maintenance mode. This is more about keeping the game up and running, fixing stuff, than really adding lots of new things to EVE Online or making really massive changes to the game. That was my feeling so far. Of course, all of that might be about to change with EVE Vegas next week, where hopefully we'll get some nice announcements and potentially not only about EVE Online but also about Project Nova. So lots to look forward to. At the moment it's just, EVE Online patches are not that big or that special, except of course, when they do decide to balance something out. At the moment I feel like that team is really going at it, and for instance the ECM change, while it doesn't take too much to explain, the entity that's ECMing you can still be targeted. That's really the only change, but it is massive for the electronic warfare system itself. It's such a huge change that it does change the dynamics and the meta in EVE Online quite drastically. And personally, I'm pretty happy with that approach. Don't be afraid to make bold choices. The player base is adaptable enough and will find new ways to have fun with all of these toys. So yeah, hopefully they can keep that balancing act going, because while the rest of the patch is not that interesting, at least this keeps the game pretty fresh and engaging. Next up, a quick look at the New Eden store. No super interesting sales for me personally here. I'm always looking for that massive value whenever it comes to a sale, such as an extra gift for Omega or something like that. That is something that's almost a no-brainer if you keep yourself subscribed anyways. But it is Angel Cartel week, and I must say that bundle does look pretty amazing, where you have the Macariel skin. Just look at that animation, looks really good. Then you've got the Dramiel skin as well. That looks quite nice. You've got that light that goes all the way across the front of the ship. They are pretty cool. But then the new one, look at that Cinnabal and that front, that flashing light at the front. That, oh my god. Look at that, really very cool skins here. So if you like Angel Cartel ships and you want some of the best looking skins for them, this is definitely something that you need to look at. There's some new ones here as well, including the Daredevil. Actually didn't take too good a look. Oh, that just looks so fresh. What I love here is that the second light actually starts going before the first one fades away. That is amazing looking. These are some really great skins, to be honest. But nothing super special on sale, so let's move on to the market itself. As always, we'll start with some plex and stuff. That's going to be at 315. Like that, and we can see that plex have gone back up a little bit. So after the sale from last week, that did show quite an impact, and in fact managed to bring the average price to less than 3 million ISK. We are back on the uptrend. If we go for Jita itself, Jita 4.4, except for one sale, 3,184,000 ISK. The buyers coming in at almost 3.1 million. If we go for NPC station sales, you can see that those are hovering at 3,150,000 ISK to, well, a little bit above 3.1 million basically, and the buyers hardly go up, so those are just shy of 3.1 million. But this does clearly indicate that unless CCP comes out with a sale or something like that, prices above 3 million for plex seem to be the norm, and I personally do think that we are on our way back up. Especially the theory that I was constantly having was keep an eye on CCP announcements, and of course next week is EVE Vegas, so perhaps the very swift buy up, you could say, here with the volumes of anything below 3 million, dragging the price back on the momentum that we were on since the bottom in mid-August, is an indication that there are people that are speculating on this at the moment. If CCP can bring the hype with the winter expansion, I think in the EVE Updates website they are talking about an actual expansion, then we might be in for some very interesting plex prizes here. Next up we have the multiple pilot trading certificate. Not the exact same pattern, right? If it were the same as Plex, that same very fast recovery, we would need to be back towards 1.25 billion. That doesn't happen, but we did stop shy of 1 billion. On the chart, you can see the massive increase in volumes as well, indicating of course that CCP has had another sale. Not as good a bottom as less than 900 million ISK, which we managed to do almost twice, but still currently selling for almost 1.1 billion, and the buyers are following suit very closely. So that's a little bit unfortunate. If that gap had remained larger, and you could for instance try to grab some of these multiple pilot trading certificates for very close to a billion, I still think that you could have made a move, but you can clearly see that the pressure is on and that people are ready to jump on these opportunities very quickly, and they don't last very long. Next up, we have the skill extractors. That does follow the Plex chart very closely, and we are again back on that upwards trend since mid-August, where we saw a bottom 4 at around 310 million ISK. Now selling for 357 million ISK almost. Buyers coming in at 336 million, and no, actually even 349 million ISK in the perimeter I Choose You Trade Hub, which again shows a pretty narrow margin, but it also shows that once that sale was over, volumes increased, people brought everything back in line with the previous trend, and the buyers basically were willing to go up in price very quickly as well, and are following pretty closely on the sell prices here. Next up, for the large skill injectors, as we've said, apparently it is supply that is doing really well on these multiple pilot trading certificate sales. So here we basically have another delay of the expected increase in price for these skill injectors, despite the increase in price in Plex, which is of course translating to the extractors. You would think that, you know, after 2 months that would also mean increased prices for the large scale injectors, but apparently the multiple pilot trading certificates have created enough potential on the skill point farms to keep the price low at the moment. All this is doing, this increased price for the skill extractors, is basically eating up part of the margins on the skill injectors of those skill farms, because they've had the opportunity to grab some of those really cheap trading certificates. And of course this latest sale is just going to delay that movement again. So at the moment, large scale injectors trading around 700 million ISK and there to stay for a little while longer. 707 million for the sellers, 688 for the buyers. That is actually pretty cheap, and I would say for the long term you can pretty easily buy large scale injectors at the moment for less than 700 million ISK. If CCP then goes on a larger period without sales to the multiple pilot trading certificates, so that everything gets used up by those farms, we are talking about potentially an interesting investment. Unfortunately, for me personally, I must say that in the last year or so, I have seen what feels like way more regular sales in the Plex market, in the trading certificate market. And what does the purchase for PA mean? The purchase of CCP by Pearl Abyss mean for these kinds of activities? That's hard to say, of course, because we can't really know if CCP was doing all of these sales in order to make sure that they could show really good revenue numbers through the Plex and the multiple pilot trading certificate system, and if they are basically forced now to continue with that pattern to keep up certain numbers or things like that. So there is actually, in my opinion, a real life component that is very important, and that we don't really know at the moment when it comes to that pattern here, where we had all of these sales on the multiple pilot trading certificates. You can clearly see 1, 2, 3 and now a fourth sale in the last 6 to 8 months. This could actually be another one here, so we could be talking about 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5 sales in pretty much the last 8 months. That's at least one every 2 months. That's quite a lot. And will that pattern continue, or are we talking about, well, let's get those sales going so that we can show some nice numbers when it comes to the real life negotiations between CCP and Pearl Abyss? It's something that makes me a little bit wary of going all in on any of these goods. So the large scale injectors though might be useful in the future, although I've got so many skill points that using that doesn't make much sense. So it's a difficult decision to make, I think, but the chart does clearly show a buy opportunity. The small scale injector, that is of course going to be the same pattern, a little bit of a bump, but you can see that we are already normalizing back towards the 140, a little bit above that million mark. 142 million for the sellers, 136.5 for the buyers. And then we have the daily alpha injector that managed to actually go to close to a 1-year high of 62.75 million ISK, is normalized a bit more around the 60 million mark, 61 for the sellers and 56 million for the buyers. So actually lots of sales, lots of activity, lots of different patterns in the plex stuff at the moment. I do think that the general trend is that plex will start to go back up with inflation, and the biggest potential on the short term lies of course with the announcements at ETH Vegas. We'll see how that works out. And then the other side of the coin is the skill injectors that basically are still at these really low prices because of the time that that all the skill point farms have been able to grab very cheaply on these training certificates when those sales hit. And yeah, it's all a balancing act when it comes to investing in this category. Let's move on to the minerals at 11.15. Like that. And I think, well, we'll start as always with titanium, which is continuing to go down, but also showing the first signs of slowing down, of trying to find a bottom price. Unfortunately, it is at less than 5 ISK on the chart at the moment. So we are talking about, I think we can do this here, 484 for the sellers, 464 for the buyers. And despite that, look at the volumes: 1 billion, 2 billion, 2 billion, 2 billion, 1.4 billion, and even the latest order is for 1.5 billion units of titanium. Supply is still quite high and driving the price down. It's almost inevitable. And here the buyers have the luxury of just slowly, you know, here 20 million, 163 million, all of that gets filled up, and we're at 463, 462. And here, if you compare these volumes, you can clearly see that we are going to keep that margin between sellers and buyers alive, and so that the potential for a bottom is not yet in sight on the buyer's market, in my opinion. Next up, we've got pyrite. After dipping to a clear 1-year low, an average price of just a little bit above 3 is quite crazy, manages to jump back above 3.5, 377 for the sellers and 353 for the buyers. All of this is a little bit strange, although I must say, of course, when you have such a dip after a 1-year straight down chart, then you do have perhaps a small investment opportunity. So we see a slight increase in volumes as well that drove the price back to, well, still a pretty damn low point for pyrite. So this is clearly still one of those minerals that is massively oversupplied in the game, and that even things like massive wars, massive destruction of titans, of keep stars and things like that only creates small bumps and has not been able to buck the trend. Compare that to the titanium chart, not the Zydrine chart, but the titanium chart, and you clearly have a more sustained price range of around 5 ISK, and then on some massive destruction you have a nice sell opportunity. Next up, we have Mexalon. That actually dipped to a 1-year low point and is now bouncing off of that 60 ISK price mark. That is not good news, of course. We are currently selling a Mexalon for 63.28, way below average, and the buyers are coming in at 57 ISK. That is very, very low as well. At this point for Mexalon, if you look at this entire chart, I would not be selling, I would be hoarding, waiting for a better opportunity. It does show that the general trend here is that we are oversupplied, that there's not enough destruction in the game, not enough consumption of minerals in the game at the moment for the production. Isogen next, yet again very bad news, breaking through the 20 ISK barrier on the chart, heading for 18 ISK here, 1-year low point for Isogen. This one is more in line with pyrite. It's just oversupplied like crazy, and there is no bucking the trend, whereas the Mexalon chart again You can clearly see that we had an average of 70 ISK around that for the entire year, but sometimes we went to 65, but we also had high points of 85 ISK a couple of times. Here we managed to reach 75 again as well. Now at the tail end, unfortunately, we are dropping off quite sharply. So for Isogen, we are selling for 19 ISK 21, buyers coming in at 1780. That is still such a wide margin, that is kind of crazy. And look at the volumes here. 18 million units, 11 million units, 13 million units on the buyers, and the sellers are coming in at 175 million, 43 million, 109 million. So there is still that way too big of a supply, and yeah, no end in sight for the suffering of Isogen here. We're just going lower. It said in, I think, the CSM minutes that CCP was okay with these really cheap minerals. I wonder how long that is going to hold true, because for Isogen, personally, I'm like really worried. I think that we could go months without mining any Isogen, you know, if a bug would just take it out of the game, and we wouldn't feel it on the market. Next up, we have, let's see, Noxium. Here tried very valiantly to get back to 300 ISK a couple of times, but at the moment I do think that we are going to find ourselves in the 250 to 300 range rather than just around the 300 range. 283 for the sellers, 275 for the buyers. Volume wise, again here 18 million, 8 million units, 2 million units. Buyers coming in with 1 and 4.4 million. It's not as bad as Isogen and Pyrite, but it is definitely not great either, especially historically speaking. Noxium used to go for like 1100 ISK on high points and things like that. Those days are over. Minerals and Tech 1 related materials seem to be super cheap in the game at the moment. And next up we've got Zydrine, then used to be called a nullsec mineral. You can't really do that anymore. From the from the CSM minutes, we also know that activity for moon mining in HiSec has eclipsed anything that CCP had projected or expected, so people are massively running those moons in HiSec as well, and this is the result, of course. That means that Zydrine and Megasite are no longer dictated by nullsec, are much more easy to bring to the trade hub like JITA itself, and is now much more supplied than before. And so we are basically going from 1000 ISK to less than 500 ISK in 1 year straight. 454 ISK for the sellers, 407 ISK for the buyers. Again, pretty wide margin. Buyers starting to get closer and closer to 400 ISK here, and yeah, more supply than demand at the moment. Something that is also quite different from before. 454 for the sellers, 407 for the buyers. Average price, if we take a look here, 440, 450. So at the moment, it's actually still the sellers that are winning out a little bit on when it comes to the price. So nobody is selling to these buyers, but you often have periods where it's in between these two. And that is something that never used to happen. It was always nullsec, or Wormhole Space, which were the only sources for Zydrine and Megasite, would have to bring those supplies to JITA, and thus the sellers were always dictating the price. This week, apparently, on a slight uptick as well, we are sellers are managing to get that price for their Zydrine, and nobody is selling to these buyers. But it's been different ever since the introduction of moon mining, of course, because sellers come in with these batches of 1 million, 8 million, 2 million, 1 million, which is of course the results from them mining out a moon for that week, those 2 weeks or whatever, and they keep competing with each other. 0.55, 0.29, 0.28, 0.25, 0.23, 21, etc. It just keeps going down. These are individual sellers that are competing with each other, and from time to time, what you would see when the margin is not as large as it is now, that there's also some of those guys that are just impatient and that just go straight to those buy orders, like, all right, gonna get rid of this Zydrine, gonna sell that straight to those buyers, and then you would see that average price find its way between those two rather than this close to the sellers. Next up, we have Megasite. Same pattern, little bit of an upswing at the very tail end here, but the 1 year trend is pretty obvious and painful, from around 1300 ISK down to less than 500 ISK. 499 for the sellers, for 58 again for the buyers. Pretty wide margin, so showing a bit of a lack of demand at the moment and plenty of supply. But again, look at those volumes: 10 million, 3 million, 5 million, 2 million. That is, you know, a corporation has a Muninn high sec. Let's just bring what we've got this week to the market and let's compete with 0.92, 0.87, 0.69, 0.68, 58, 50, etc, etc, etc. So way more competition in the sellers, and whenever the margins are not as large as now, you also have plenty of them that are impatient and actually sell to the buyers. And then finally we have Morphyte. That's a little bit of an outlier despite the fact that we are going down in price as well to less than 9,000 ISK. 8,700 for the sellers, 8,300 for the buyers. It is almost, in my opinion, interesting to start looking for those buyers if you want a Morphyte investment. Also to keep in mind, this is tied to the Tech 2 economy, not to the Tech 1 economy, and I think is still only available in nullsec. Not entirely sure on that, but it is a little bit different from all the previous one. And you can clearly see that it knows some spikes, some nice spikes during wartime when Tech 2 ships get blown up in larger numbers. And at the moment, I would prefer buyers closer to 8,000 ISK, but 8,326 is already decently low and probably investment worthy. Next up, we are moving on to our PI at 2110. Like that. Let's go over these, and especially what I'm interested in here is now knowing that we have let's see, structure skins on the horizon, the new structures for nullsec as well, but we still don't really know what they're made of. Let's see if investment and if speculation has started on these advanced PI materials. We can clearly see that the broadcast nodes have bumped off the 2 million mark, are currently selling for a bit above 2.1 million, but the buyers are still at 2 million. So this is more market activity rather than massive speculation in my book. Nothing out of line. Construction blocks back to that low of 10,000 ISK. Yep, 10,400 for sellers. Lack of buyers, 9,700 ISK. In my opinion, if you're looking for a PI investment, this is one to look at. Try and grab some construction blocks for less than 10,000 ISK. Look at the rest of the chart. Be a bit lucky that there is PI needed in the next set of structures as well. And there you go, you probably have a pretty good investment. Consumer electronics next, also declining, not yet to a 1 year low point, but clearly below average. 13,300 for the sellers, 11,400 for the buyers. It's actually more of a widening of the gap, and yeah, people not willing to grab these consumer electronics for 13,300. More people are actually selling to the buyers to create this average price, and we even have pretty high volumes here. So it's really looking like lots of people are just straight up selling to these buyers. 11,400 on this chart. It's definitely below average. Is it the buy opportunity yet? The chart, I would say, is yeah, you can consider it. It's not the 1 year low point though yet. For coolants, we are finally going back down a little bit after managing to get to 11,000 ISK. We are heading back for 10,000 ISK, 10,400 for the sellers, 9,800 for the buyers. Quite a bit of volatility here. That is quite interesting. Look at that increased volume. So definitely an increase in supply that came in and crashed the price here. But we are still doing quite well for the year here, and well, we're also coming from a 1 year high point of 11,400 ISK, so a bit of a contraction here. As long as it doesn't last too long, should be okay. Enriched uranium is holding quite well at above 13,000 ISK here. 13,800 for the sellers, but 12,100 for the buyers. That's again a super wide margin here on this PI material, and showing that here people are not willing to dump their enriched uranium to those buyers, but all or most of them have the patience for a sell order. Integrity response drones next. Okay, that's interesting. That bounce at 2 million is not as high as I would have thought. 2.2 million for the sellers, almost 2.1 million for the buyers. Definitely below average, something that you can still grab if you want to invest in advanced PI materials, hoping that they'll become a part of the next set of structures. Mechanical parts, same pattern as the coolants. After doing really well, getting up to 12,000 ISK, has to give back some of that ground, breaking through the 11,000 ISK barrier. 11,150 for the sellers, 10,400 for the buyers. Again, wide margin opening up here. Nuclear reactors, actually, after a bit of hesitation, is still on the uptrend to, yeah, all right, we actually have an average day of 110,000 ISK. 108 for the sellers, 89 for the buyers. This is such a weird place. This used to be such a good one, very predictable. Have a couple of weeks at 120, 115, stuff like that. Drop back down to 80,000 ISK or less. Get back up there. Now it's this strange motion here with, again, look at that margin. 108,000 ISK for the sellers. That's something we haven't seen in quite a few months. But then the buyers are at 89,000 ISK, which is, well, pretty damn low as well on the chart. So that's just a massive margin between these two. Yeah, I'm not really sure where this is coming from, but it is pretty obvious that this is happening in the PI market in general at the moment. And then sometimes you've got the buyers that are getting all of those cheap goods, and then you can see the construction blocks at a 1-year low point. And then sometimes it's the sellers that are winning out. And then you've got stuff like, what was it? The enriched uranium that's actually staying at a 1-year high point. But that margin stays really massive between the buyers and the sellers. And so here it's all seller action, and here it's all buyer action. Kind of a weird situation, not something we've seen very often before. The organic mortar applicators, after also reaching a pretty low point of less than 1 million, are bouncing off of that on a bit of an increased volume. This is more in line with my expectation, right? Some people taking advantage of those really low prices to make sure that they are ready for the announcements if they do happen. It's still up in the air, of course. Almost 1.1 million for the sellers and almost 1 million for the buyers. So you can still, in my opinion, grab mortar applicators for less than 1 million right now. Robotics, inevitable decline, not a good sign for the rest of fuel-related PI materials, breaking through the 100,000 ISK mark and currently selling for 98, buyers at 94 to 95. So here the margin is still not that big, and we have a more easy to read chart, I would say, on the upswing to 100,000 ISK, then reaching a peak at 110 and now declining at the moment, probably on more supplies. Nothing too crazy in the volumes. Then you get this smaller margin and a more predictable, more readable chart than some of the others. Self-harmonizing power cores still hovering just a bit above 2 million. Buyers are at less than 2 million, 1.9. So I would still say that you can definitely grab those as well. Superconductors next, declining, breaking through the 11,000 ISK barrier on average, yes. Sellers 11,500, buyers 10,500. Nothing too crazy, although it's a decent margin. And here again, average price sometimes 10,500. That means that the buyers are winning out from time to time as well. I would say that the volumes here, though, look at that: 86,000, 40, 98,000. Sellers 66. This could turn around at any time because this doesn't feel like it's completely out of whack. Or oversupplied, I should say. Test cultures reaching a 1-year low point, 7,100 on the chart, 7,200 for the first seller, but 6,750 for the buyers. If you're looking for a PI investment and you don't want to do the advanced PI ones, I'd say test cultures looks pretty good, just like construction blocks. We are clearly currently hesitating at really low prices. And then finally, we have the wetware mainframes that for this week are hovering at their low point as well, about 2.1 million on the chart. Buyers are just below that, still quite doable. Look at the supplies here, total numbers, but there is this one buyer of 5,400 units that is willing to grab anything at less than 2.1 million apparently. And yeah, as a result here, PI kind of strange. I'd need to think about what it means that that margin is opening up in so many of these goods on the advanced PI materials market. Basically, I think most people are now waiting for the actual announcements for stuff to hit CC, and that's when we might see some speculation happening. So if you want to get prepared for that, I do think that this is still the time to put up a nice buy order. Next up, advanced moon materials, 2920. Like that. All right, let's start with the carbonates. The trend last week was everything was going down in price. Here for crystalline carbonate, after breaking through the 150 mark, we do have some increased volumes and we've got a price back in line with before at 159, 160 for the sellers, 156 for the buyers. So we're definitely back above that 150. People spotted that opportunity and made a move quite quickly on plugging that gap here. So those investments were made at that 1 year low point. Ferrite carbide next hovering at the 150 mark. Volumes are up just a little bit, not too much movement on the chart here. Buyers coming in at 147. I think that people are, yeah, look at them here, 8 million, 3 million, 2.1 million. I think those are clearly numbers for investors. So here you can buy ferrite carbide for less than 150, and there's plenty of people trying to do so. Next up, we have our titanium carbide that is continuing a decline and reaching a 1 year low point, also playing with 150. Buyers are at 141. This is another one where we clearly have a buy opportunity. You know, try 145, 144. You're definitely, I think, yeah, definitely, and I think should never follow each other, but I think you've got a very high chance of actually grabbing some titanium carbide for less than 150. If you look at this entire chart, that looks like a pretty good investment. Keep one thing in mind, as was said with the minerals, high-sec moon mining activity is way higher than expected, and so as a result this might have an impact on the average prices for these going forward. Next up, we've got tungsten carbide also crashing to a 1 year low point, currently selling for 170. Buyers coming in at 163. I think that I pulled the trigger on that myself. Let's see if I can spot it in the ticker. If we come across that, we'll see. But here, basically the bleeding has stopped on increased volume. People are starting to grab tungsten carbide at these prices, of course, but that's no surprise. It's actually a 1 year low point at the moment. So all of these under pressure. A little bit of hesitation on the crystalline carbonates, but I do think that here basically investors made their move when we did reach that 1 year low point as well. Next up, for the metamaterials, here are the plasmonic metamaterials. Well, if everything of these carbonites are is under pressure, we should see a decline in price here as well, and we do. We have a slow decline in the plasmonic metamaterials, heading towards 17,500. 18,600 for the sellers, 17,900 for the buyers. Not yet a 1 year low point, but clearly below average at this point. Oh, and I should have started with the photonic metamaterials that are holding strong, actually just below 20,000 is still doing quite all right. 19,800 for the sellers, 18,800 for the buyers. This one is a touch below average, but nothing too crazy. So as we said, plasmonic metamaterials dipping down and going well below average at this point. Non-linear metamaterials, after dipping down quite sharply as well, are back up towards 25,000. Sellers 24,400, buyers 24,100. Narrow margin, average price, maybe at just a slight touch below that, nothing too crazy, but yeah, keep the carbides in mind. We can expect more pressure there as well, in my opinion. Terahertz metamaterials, same thing, after a bit of hesitation, going back down, trying to land at 20,000 ISK, is obviously below average, but the buyers willing to pay more than 20,000 ISK here, so that is not yet in buy order territory, whereas some of these carbonite stuff is, in my opinion. Next up, we have the other materials. Here are the fermionic condensates continuing their slow decline here, selling for 95,000 ISK, buyers at 93,300. That margin is closing up, but again, look at the volume: 60k, 30k, 173k. Buyers coming in with 2,000, 1,000, 22,000. All of that is much lower. I think the pressure is going to continue for now. Ferrogel, after a increased decline to less than 45,000 ISK, increased volumes, jumping back up. I still think that the trend will be down, but Ferrogel did just do a nice little jump up to 49,000 ISK for the sellers. Fullerites, again with a bit of hesitation, continuing the decline, now well below 1,000 ISK here, so obviously getting close to buy order territory. I think 914, apparently the buyers have been forced up just a little bit. Hypersynaptic fibers, actually the one that is not clearly showing a downtrend at the moment, although trying to get back up to 15,000 ISK, and I basically think going back down from there. 14,900. Clearly see that the competition is already taking place at this price, and the buyers have room to go down to 14,160. So the pressure does exist, but in hypersynaptic fibers the market is willing to go back up as well from time to time. Nanotransmitters, after declining to close to one year low point at 4,300 ISK, we are back up to 5,200. Buyers at 5,000 ISK here. So a bit of a counter movement to last week, which is a bit of a surprise to me, but most of them are on volume, so it's pretty obvious that this is investments. Same thing with the phenolic composites, pretty massive decline. Maybe it was my EVE talk last week or something that convinced a couple of people to pull the trigger here, but again, increased volumes as we reach the bottom of 2,500 ISK pretty much. Back to 3,000, 2,700 for the buyers. And finally, we have the ceramic fibers that is continuing the decline, heading for 400 ISK here. Buyers at 392. You can pick that up for less than 400 ISK, which I think is decently interesting if we look at this entire chart. In fact, we already see that interest is increasing if we look at these volumes. So Muninn materials at the moment, very interesting to actually see all of these bounces in the other materials. That would be one indication that perhaps we are not in for general lower prices across the board and just so much more supply that a minerals 2.2 might be brewing for the Muninn materials. This is an indication that perhaps things will not go that way. Next up, we have the Tech 2 ships at 3620. Like that. Let's go over these pretty quickly. I think the Aries, after after an increase in price to almost 45,000 ISK, 43 million ISK, not 1,000 ISK, damn, that would be cheap. Yeah, after the Aries bumping up to 43 million ISK, is now back on a more normal track. 33 million for the sellers, 31 million for the buyers. What were the volumes like here? Actually pretty damn high, so that is quite a surprise that people must have been able to sell for 40, 38, 35 million. A really good price, and all of this is of course CCP intervening in the interceptors and the markets going a little bit crazy. The general trend in non-interceptor, non-changed ships here does seem to be down. Here is the Basilisk getting very close to one year low point at 220 million. Buyers coming in at 211. Pretty damn cheap. You can clearly see now that we are going back down and well below average. Cerberus was at a one year low point last week. Is still hovering around that price range. 200 million ISK, 186 million for the buyers, very cheap. So here I do think that we are starting to see that lower Muninn mining prices are starting to show through. And number two, of course, no really major wars in Nullsec at the moment, so not that much destruction in the Tech 2 ships happening. The Claw declining to a one year low point, selling now for 19 million ISK, buyers coming in at 18 million ISK. That poor ship has gone completely out of the meta. Nobody is interested in it anymore. And as a result, if you hope and expect CCP to actually rectify that situation, this is a nice buy opportunity. The Crow, after reaching a pretty low point of 28.5 million, shooting back up to 35 million ISK. It's 35 million for the sellers, 33 million for the buyers. What I personally think is happening here is that there's lots of theory crafting, lots of position making, and lots of people deciding, well, what's going to become our interdicted interceptor fleet then? Do we use the Ares? Yeah, all right, that's a great idea. Look at that fit, that's so much DPS. Jump up to 43 million ISK. Or do we use the Crow? That's apparently what happened now. Yeah, that looks quite okay. Let's get some Crows going. Increased volume up to 35 million ISK. That's basically, I think, what's happening in the market here. The Crusader, though, that one is not interdicted anymore, I guess, because it is now also crashing down to 20 million or less. Nobody wants to buy that anymore. As a result, I would say a very speculative buy opportunity there for who knows how long as well, of course. Next up, we've got the Guardian. Again, that trend here is pretty obvious. Well below average, actually close to a low point. 210 million for the first seller, 200.6 million for the buyers. Heretic, Next one that's also bumping back up a little bit at the tail end here. 74 million for the sellers, 53 million for the buyers. You can clearly see that just a couple of sales though can make a bit of a difference on the daily averages, but the 5-day moving average has clearly gone to less than average. The hound, after reaching a low point here, is that's I called it last week. I said if I would invest in a Take-Two ship, this is it. Well, looks like a lot of people followed that advice, whether they saw Eve Talk or not, I can't be sure, of course, but look at the volume increase, like 3 times the normal volumes, bring the price back well above 25 million, 29 million for the sellers, 28 million for the buyers. That's more the hesitation range, right? It's still, yeah, it is. Okay. The chart is actually a jump up to more than 30 million ISK as we actually normalize back down here. So that's quite a bit of movement very quickly in the hound. 28 million is like, should I buy? Maybe I should, but maybe I should wait. Here we went to 25 million and I was like, yeah, okay, 1 year low point. This is your opportunity. Next up, the Ishtar, again showing that general trend of Take-Two ships finally getting to a less than average price for the year, selling for 260. Buyers are coming in at 229 million ISK. The Manticore next, still holding 30 to 35 million, actually on an average price at the moment, 33.5 for the sellers, 30 million for the buyers. The Nemesis, after also dipping to close to 25 million, not as pronounced in the volume increase, but is basically back 30 million, 29 million for the sellers. This is one where, yeah, probably not. We're back at slightly below average prices. On Neros next, here is the trend is pretty obvious again, heading back to those 200 million price ranges, 210 for the sellers and 188 for the buyers. Pretty wide margin between buyers and sellers on these Take-Two cruisers. The Purifier next staying below 30 million ISK, but nothing too pronounced there, 26 million for the buyers. But then the Raptor, yeah, poor Raptor going down to less than 20 million. No, a bit above that, but look at the lack of buyers. Yeah, this is, well, honestly, the Claw just takes such a beating that if you would want to take that gamble, that's the ship I would choose over the Raptor, but that pattern here is clearly showing up as well. Then we've got the Saber, again, you know, below average, bit of a bump up, but nothing too crazy. Scimitar, after some very nice volatility, that's something that we would have loved to do some trades on, right? 200 million, high at 300 million, back down to 200, back up to 300, and currently down. Where are the buyers at? 209 million ISK, maybe a bit high for an actual purchase. Hopefully we can still keep things calm for a little bit longer and we can create a buy opportunity. If I'm not mistaken, last week the Guardian, pretty obvious that you could be buying that and then hope for sales at 300 million on some actual action. So these logistics cruisers, very, very interesting. Something like the Guardian does look in a great spot if you can grab it from a buyer at around 200 million ISK. One thing to keep in mind, of course, volume wise it's a bit more difficult, and we are talking 200 to 300 million ISK investment to be made, so don't buy a dozen of them. A couple, I think, should make for easy trades there. But volume-wise, yeah, don't go too crazy. So next up, we still have the Stiletto. Same hesitation. What's it going to be for the Stiletto? You've got those clear volume increases after we dip to 30 million ISK. Currently selling for 33 million, buyers at 32 million. And then finally, the Taranis that is still holding above 20 million ISK here. So yeah, not as pronounced as the Claw. Take-Two ships, pretty interesting. I especially am liking what I'm seeing in something like the Cerberus. Some of them are clearly at 1 year low points, and then personally the logistics cruisers seem quite interesting if we look at the spikes that happened during wars in the last year or so. Next up we have the Tech-3 ships, that is at 43.50. Yeah, 43.50. Let's go. As always, we'll start with the destroyers. You can clearly see that hesitation here, increased volumes, but the price not really doing too much. But we're not willing to go below 30 million at the moment. 32 million for the sellers, 28.75 million for the buyers. I'd say that that's pretty damn interesting. Sellers also, latest seller, 257 units being listed at 32 million. No fresh competition coming above that, so you clearly have that hesitation. You still have the hundreds of them here, and then you've got the buyers being able to go to less than 29 million. You know, it's still quite interesting. If you can grab a couple on those buy orders, I think that it's actually not a bad idea. Next up, we've got the Hecate actually taking up, all right, going for 50 million ISK at the moment. That's for the sellers, 40 million for the buyers. If you manage to grab a couple here at 37 million, or especially here at less than 35 million, this is a great sell opportunity, and I do think I've got a couple lying around that I need to sell. So that Hecate, to my surprise, is sell opportunity. Clearly see that the volumes are completely different from what we saw in most of these Tech 3 ships in the last weeks, and as a result, I think I would strike if you manage to grab a couple of cheap Hecates. The Jackdaw, exact opposite picture, languishing at around 35 million, is close to 1 year low point. Buyers at 32 million. Still 154 here. So again, a little bit less than the Confessor. This is 74 days old. Competition here is nothing too crazy. It looks to me like some of the big players are holding off from bringing in the massive volume so that they don't crash the price even lower, which does mean that if they keep that up, we might be in for more Hecate scenarios where you eventually dry up, of course, where that backlog is absorbed, and then market speculation can bring the price back up. So here the Jackdaw, you can still buy it for around 32 million. If you look at this entire chart for 32 million, that is definitely still a pretty good price. Just like with the Confessor, perhaps this is still your time to quickly try and snag a couple of cheap ones, because right now, these volumes are not as crazy as, let's say, a month ago, a couple of weeks ago. We can clearly see now on the Hecate that the first drying up has happened. It's an interesting situation. We might be in for the turnaround. It remains a gamble, of course. The Zweppel is in the same position, I would say, as the Confessor. You still have 332 here, but 74 days old. Competition here, nothing too crazy. Buyers are at 25 million ISK, so that means I grab my Zweppels for 29, and I might actually want to grab a couple more at like 26 million or something like that. But this is still your opportunity right now to grab Zweppels for way less than 30 million ISK, and if this keeps up, if fresh supply stays in these much smaller numbers and this eventually dries up, then we might be in for better prices and a sell opportunity like what happened here with the Hecate. Interesting situation. Definitely choices, in my opinion, need to be made here. We could be in the exact opposite, of course, if those sellers, those big players and those producers are there decide that their patience is ending and they start their dumping, then of course it could be a very bad idea. But I still think that here what happened in the Hecate is a strong indication that also this will not be going up too crazily. Neither does it here in the Confessor. It was the Confessor 77 days old, it's 257, but nothing new is coming in here. So that is a very weird situation where I basically think that they're not willing to go to those even lower prices, which means that potentially this is your buy opportunity. On the cruisers, stable, a bit more stable finally for the Legion, selling for 144, that's pretty cheap, and 135 volume-wise. We have to go to 145 for 360. That still feels quite oversupplied. And here we do have a full front page, including probably 50 or so Legions coming in the last 24 hours. So that is pretty obviously oversupplied. Is that a buy opportunity? Yeah, probably at 135. Just don't go crazy with how many you buy on this one, and you need a bit more patience. The Loki, after staying stable at 160 for a while, is back up to 215. Interesting. Volumes gone, nothing too crazy there. 201 for the sellers on big volume purchases. So that again is pretty interesting. Apparently a big purchase happened here in the Loki when we were at these low prices, and same pattern as with the Hecate, basically a nice jump up in the price all of a sudden, meaning that a second one is showing, well, you know, if you buy at the right time, if you had bought in this period, you would be able to sell at a nice profit right now. How long do those last? Maybe not very long. We'll see that in the upcoming weeks. In the meantime, the Proteus is playing with another 1-year low point, selling for 122.5. Bars are at 120. The bad news here is, of course, very low volumes. The least popular strategic cruiser at the moment, yeah, if you have to choose for 120 for a Proteus or 135 for a Legion, I think I know what I would choose. And then finally we've got the Tengu that is bouncing up from its 1-year low point, currently selling for 142. Bars are at 135. Nothing too crazy in the volumes there either. And yeah, slight jump up, not as good as the Loki. But it seems to me that we are currently balancing on a knife's edge in the Tech 3 market. You've got some interesting jumps there, and some drying up of the crazy volumes of the hundreds of ships on the market in a couple. And yeah, it could really go either way. If this is the producers holding off and their patience ends, then we could get flooded all of a sudden. But if this is the actual pattern where big purchases happen and yeah, the big players don't want to sell even lower, then perhaps at some point we will see more of these sell opportunities. Very, very interesting situation in my opinion. And then for the final extra product, I'm going to take a request. It was to take a look at the Muninn, so we'll do that at 5040. And the request was very specifically for the Muninn because it is apparently a Gnostic doctrine, I think, for the Imperium. So we'll take a look at that. Can we find you? Here is the Muninn. Tech 2 cruiser, really very nice ship in my opinion. 264 million for the sellers, 231 for the buyers, actually on an average price, whereas most Tech 2 cruisers seem to be below average at the moment. It is pretty obvious that the Muninn here is still at an average price and currently selling at a premium compared to most other cruisers. Also, the increased popularity is pretty obvious. Early part of the year, nobody is buying anything, and here those volumes have steadily been increasing to sometimes seeing 100 sales or even 200 sales on a day. Average probably 60, 70, something like that is possible. So very interesting suggestion. I'm not going to add it to the Tech 2 roster. It's already quite a lot of them at the moment. Yeah, but this one, you know, definitely something that you're selling at a better price. But I also do feel that you can clearly see here on the decrease from 350 to 250 million ISK that moon mining has just taken up throughout the game. There's more supply and more stability after the August war, and as a result the price is under pressure. It is definitely pretty cheap compared to the rest of the year. 231. Is it an investment that you want to make? Well, that's the gamble that you need to take. Do you prefer this, having the Muninn, knowing that the Imperium flies that in nullsec and start up a little bit higher, or do you go for something like a logistics cruiser, which would be my choice personally? Something like the Guardian that is currently trading well below the entire chart, and that actually has spikes up to 300 million ISK. The result of a Tech 2 ship being, I think, in the meta of the Imperium is that it's also being massively produced as well, which I think decreases the opportunity for massive profits. But it's definitely an interesting suggestion, and I'm happy to cover it here in the extra products. A Tech 2 cruiser that is currently selling at an average price, whereas most of the others are clearly under pressure. That is the difference between a ship that is in the meta for the bigger groups and the others that are not generally so, or not as I would say pronounced as this one. So yeah, there you go guys. That's going to be it for this EVE Talk. Thank you very much for watching, and as always, I'll see you next time.